we had to go off and start shooting the movie, and they were late turning out the Predator, and we all were desperately anticipating. It's coming. It's here today. No, tomorrow. Finally, the day it arrived, and they took the crowbars and pried it open and opened it and lifted it out of the box, and we all looked at each other and said, "Oh, are we in trouble?"
Welcome to Predator Minute, the podcast that breaks down the 1987 action sci-fi classic Predator 1 minute at a time. I'm John Zabriskie.
I'm Aaron Zabriskie.
And today we're talking minute 54 of Predator. Minute 54, you might call the Brian Urlacher of minutes. Were you a big Brian Urlacher fan of Chicago Bears fame?
Urlacher. Yeah, I thought he fit in the great tradition of Chicago linebackers with excellent last names. Really appreciated Dick Butkus.
Dick
and
Butkus.
The sometimes linebacker Mike Singletary. And Brian Urlacher.
Yeah, I like that number too. 54, that's a good strong number there. Good solid number. Anyway, talking minute 54 of Predator. Minute 54 opens with Mac saying goodbye to Blain and ends with the Predator about to seal a wound? ? And as we usually do, we just break the minute down into different parts. I was going to talk about the first part here. So the first part we're carrying over from the last minute. Mac is saying goodbye, bro.
Goodbye, bro.
To his buddy Blain, and then he snaps the poncho back up over Blain's face, and a little scene mirroring the opening of the scene where he snapped the poncho away from Blain's face. And then the camera cuts to Anna's face. It's zooming into her as she's looking at something, and then it pans down to show that she's looking at where she wiped the blood, the Predator's green glowing blood, onto her pants, and it's starting to glow more, I believe, as it starts to become dusk out. And we'll move to part 2 here in a minute, but what are some things, Aaron, that you're noticing about this first part?
One thing that comes to mind is, I know you guys talked about this a little bit, is there's this like homoerotic kind of speculation that's occurred on the internet about the relationship between Mac and Blain, and I think that's baloney.
Yeah,
I think that's silly. I think the people who would say that are the kind of people who are kind of oversimplifying their relationship. It's, I think, pretty normal for men to have friends that they're very close to, and you can be close friends with a man without it being homosexual.
Right. Yeah.
I just thought I'd point that out at the beginning here. At any rate, I think when most people see the movie originally for the first time, their thought isn't that this is an amazing homosexual relationship that's being brought forth on the screen in a really courageous way. I think what you're seeing is just two close friends whose relationship is being sort of illustrated by Mac's sorrow and grief over the loss of Blain here. So I do like the fact that this movie does spend some time to recognize characters that pass. I think it's very common, especially in horror movies, that when someone dies, that they immediately move on with the action with zero recognition of the fact that people have just died. They make people's deaths almost sort of trite, or kind of remove the humanity from it, just to sort of serve with racking up the body count. I think that, for instance, all of the gorillas that were killed in this movie, there's not a lot of backstory or emotion given to their deaths, but that's understandable given the movie's not really supposed to be about them. But I do appreciate it when a movie tries to add some humanity to characters' deaths. I think that helps with the impact of the movie, so that you raises up the tension and makes it more interesting, makes you care more about what happens. And then the next little sequence with the blood on his pants, I think is pretty cool. it does look like they oversaturated the bright green there quite a bit on the film, which makes it look probably a lot more conspicuous than it was supposed to, just because of the fact that this is supposed to be something she's hiding, but it's like looking like her whole leg is going to burst in flames or something. The plus, it was just like a couple drops on the leaf, but on her pants there, it's like it seems to be expanding and increasing in size, which seems unlikely. So it seems like when they were making the scene, they wanted to make it really obvious what they were doing, but they might have overdone it a little bit.
Yeah, and you see right after it cuts from her to the branch that the predator is going to sit on while giving himself first aid, the blood does go in and out of brightness, from kind of goopy and like not as glowy to just a sheer sheen, bright green, like we see on her leg right here. And when you're looking at her leg, I mean, it looks like maybe they put a little bit of liquid there, but for the most part, it looks like total After Effects, where they just, like you were saying, they illuminated her whole leg to make it really obvious what you're seeing. But to go back real quick to Mac and Blain, I do enjoy Mac giving one final goodbye, bro, to his buddy Blain after he gives him the flask, just to remind you of the closeness of the characters. Like you said, giving the characters some time to actually mourn a death. And and what you're saying about horror movies, they pretty much go right back into that trope of killing off the characters at a pretty quick and thoughtless rate much later, after the trap they spring doesn't work, and then the other four of the group go down pretty quickly in succession.
That's true. Blain does seem to get the most time for any kind of mourning or afterthoughts after his death of any of the characters. But he's a big badass, so he deserves it.
Yeah, he was the big man when the big man fell.
That's right, the big man. Jesse Ventura maintained in interviews after this movie that his character had to be one of the first to be killed, just to show that if the biggest, toughest, strongest guy can die, then any of them can die.
That's right. Yeah, I think Jeff and I talked about that before, talking about it being called the sacrificial lion, where right, you're losing a really big, strong character who you think is meant to symbolize strength for the group, and going that quickly
right after the sacrificial lamb.
Just right. Hawkins was our sacrificial lamb. Yep. They put him right back to back. Let's see. I think the last thing I had to say about the first part here is I really like the lighting and the set decorating. It is as it's zooming into Anna, the background foliage is really looking Hollywooded up. It's really looking perfectly placed, and there's something about that I really enjoy at times, even though you're reminded you're watching a movie, like thinking about how this is some Hollywood effects and some Hollywood production design going into this.
Right on. Yeah, they obviously went to a lot of effort to make the jungle really filmable, and these are some of the scenes where they tried to make it more like a set piece rather than it being kind of a little bit more chaotic like it is in some of the later scenes, especially.
But our next part, we're cutting to a log with some blood, some goopy green blood dripping onto it, and then some invisibility, some invisible body parts go in front of the bloodied log, and then all of a sudden the predator decloaks for the first time. We're seeing the predator in flesh and blood for the first time in this movie. We see his wound and the blood. He opens a med kit with a lot of different alien doctor tools. He grabs something from the kit. He squeezes something in his hand. He applies that to the wound. He grabs and uses a syringe on his wound, and then he's about to put something else on that bullet wound right as the minute ends. And Aaron, you're a doctor. You're a doctoring man,
That's
Mr.
true.
Doctor.
I am.
If you don't mind, can you kind of take us through what he's doing? What is his process for healing himself?
Gotcha. So yeah, we'll start by going through his med kit here.
Sure.
Actually, I'll go even further back. I think it's interesting that he's still oozing blood so much, if this were a human, that would be very unlikely at this point. Your body has a very good system for coagulating blood to stop bleeding, especially in extremities.
Mm-hmm.
And so it would be unlikely for a relatively small wound in extremity to still be bleeding after this amount of time. So presumably that means there's something a little bit different about the predator that makes him drip blood. That's giving the makers of the film obviously the benefit of the doubt that it's not just something randomly done to make sure that it's dripping blood at the right times, but assuming that there's some kind of logic and regularity in this universe, then it means his blood's a little bit different than your average person's. And that comes into play later in the movie, where the dripping, glowing green blood again brings the focus of the camera when he has his final showdowns with Arnold. The fact that it's just so voluminous as it flows.
Right. The predator bleeds a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Really, it helps the cinema of the movie that well. It's good. So then he opens up his med kit after he sits down there for a minute, and seems to have several things in it. So there's a few points during the scene where you get a pretty clear look at the med kit right around second 32-ish to 36, something like that. You get a pretty good look, and the things that I can see.
Yeah, I mean it's a pretty badass med kit, the way it opens up and like kind of slides open. Oh,
one is he's always got this syringe that's connected to like via hose, and it's hard to tell if it's supposed to be like a power source or if there's some kind of medicine that's supposed to flow through that. And then from there, also in the med kit, you can see it's kind of hard to tell if it's a really unusual looking pair of scissors or if he's got two scalpel blades back to back. Must be scissors. Yeah, but it's unusual looking. It's not any that I've seen in a healthcare setting. Next to that, he's got this a very unusual looking clamp that looks more like a woodworking tool. I'm actually
I was gonna say it looks kind of like a wine opener.
Yeah, it looks like a
corkscrew.
Exactly. That's exactly what it looks like. I'm not sure exactly what that is. It might be part of a retractor kit. I can't tell. Again, this is not something that you would come across all that very often. And then the next thing is a really simple little spatula / soft retractor that we'd use for really minor procedures, and that's a really common looking thing that you'd see all over the place. And then something you don't see initially in the med kit here, but he pulls out towards the end when he starts to use it, is a clamp, and it looks like some kind of like auto snapping clamp or something like that that he uses later. So to begin with, he takes out some kind of green something in his hands and crushes it, and then puts it in the wound. And it's hard to say exactly what that might be, but on I think you pointed out on a message that I got from you earlier that on the authoritative website Xenopedia, they list as likely some kind of antiseptic. Yeah, probably. That seems reasonable. That's something that you would definitely put on a wound. Although the most effective antiseptic on a wound like that to begin with wouldn't be some kind of like medicine. It would be just water, just washing it. And and who knows what the predator's relationship with water is. As far as the physiology goes, does he drink it? Probably. Right. Who knows? So maybe he can't use that to clean out his wound. Don't know. But it would be unusual for your first step to be to put medicine in it, because your best bet for cleaning out a wound like that is copious amounts of clean water. Then proceeds to pull out this big, gnarly-looking syringe, which is very unusual for it to have this hose sticking out of it. I don't know exactly what that would entail, but it looks like a real syringe. It doesn't have a needle on it in here, but this looks very similar to the types of syringes that veterinarians use. Dentists would use a syringe of a little bit similar style, where it's got a metal cage, and then in the so he pulls back the plunger on the metal cage, and if you were actually using it, then what you do is you'd put a vial or an ampule of whatever medicine you're going to be injecting, sort of in the body of the syringe. and then as you press the plunger, it would then inject whatever medication you're using. Without a needle, all that would be doing is just going onto the surface of the wound, which doesn't make a ton of sense. But if you were going to be using this for real, you would need a needle on it, and then you would want to put that in the wound. And then the most likely thing you'd be injecting would be some kind of anesthetic, some kind of pain medication. And although we don't get to it in this minute, it seems to be the case that in the next minute, if it is pain medicine, doesn't seem to be working that well. But then again, it usually takes a minute or two for a local anesthetic to give you good effect. So maybe he just didn't wait long enough. I don't know. But then again, like I said, he didn't have a needle on it either, so maybe he didn't really apply it very well into the correct area.
Right.
Because if you just inject it without a needle, it would just wash right away immediately. It would just slide away. It wouldn't actually infiltrate into your tissues in order to block the pain response. And then the clamp he's using is pretty cool looking. I have never seen one that looks quite like that. But the and in the next minute you get to see exactly how it works. But it would definitely clamp off any bleeding vessels. So it would work for sure. But then again, you shouldn't really need to be clamping off a bleeding vessel in a wound like this. So there's something different about the predator's physiology. Evidently, that means that he has to. But all in all, it's a pretty cool use of a med kit in the field that's got all kinds of fancy toys in it.
Yeah, super cool. You referenced the Xenopedia article before, but this is the Predator's med kit. It is called the Metacomp. And the article goes on to talk about the things you see in the Metacomp. It says the visible contents are powder, a shrapnel extractor, so that must be what the wine corkscrew remover is.
Yeah, I guess so.
A small spatula, which you talked about, a pair of scissors, 2 wound clamps, a stimulant shot, and a tube of antiseptic. So the stimulant shot, I think maybe that's what he's putting on
I guess
there with the syringe?
Yes, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. But
How would you do that right before your surgery?
Yeah, exactly. Get yourself all pumped up. If you were losing a lot of blood and you were concerned about it, then you could potentially give yourself a shot of adrenaline or something like that.
Right.
That would help make sure that all of the tissues in your body are getting enough blood flow, because it would speed up your heart and help it beat more efficiently. That would be unusual, to say the least. The other thing that you could potentially do is if the other name for adrenaline is epinephrine, and that's the most commonly how doctors and such refer to it. If you were to use epinephrine at the site of bleeding, you could potentially use that to contract blood vessels. One of the effects of epinephrine used in a very specific place is it will contract the blood vessels there some. It doesn't have a huge effect, though, so that would be kind of an inefficient way to do that. It's much more effective to put your hand on something and squeeze than it is to inject epinephrine into an area to reduce blood flow. But maybe that's what it is referring to there. Don't know. Like we said, we're not familiar with the predator's physiology, so who knows? And then the shrapnel extractor, that's not a thing. So there's no such medical tool as a shrapnel extractor. And yeah, it's hard to say exactly what that tool is. Yeah, you're exactly right. It looks like a corkscrew for removing a cork from a wine bottle. It doesn't look like a real medical tool. But if it is a real medical tool, it would be something related to like a retractor, something related to a piece of metal that you put into place to keep what you're looking at clear. And so your body's very loose, full of loose, soft tissue. And so if you were to cut open a leg, like in this case, if he has a bullet wound in his leg, then the way to actually see down into the base of the wound is to pull away the skin and the other stuff that's close to the surface so you can see underneath it. And a tool like that potentially could be something you would use for that. I was reminded of this shrapnel extractor ridiculousness a couple weeks ago. I was watching this movie on Netflix. Hilary Swank playing her characteristic, like, gnarly characters that she often does. Has she ever been like in a romantic comedy or something. The
Hilary Swank. Yeah, I think
because it
some
seems
of her
like
Disney movies were like teen comedy rom-coms.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, every movie I've seen her in, is $1 Million Baby or.
Oh, you said Hilary Swank. I thought you were talking about Hilary Duff.
No, not Hilary Duff. No, Hilary Swank. Who?
Oh, you're talking about
was it Girl
I Am
Interrupted?
Mother.
Yeah, exactly. So
okay.
I didn't want to mention it by name for fear of copyright infringement, but the kidding. So in I Am Mother, she gets shot at the hip, supposedly, whatever. Anyway, there's a point in the movie where they make a point of saying we have to remove the bullet to save her life. It's absurd. Makes no sense. And every time you see this in a movie where they're taking shrapnel and pieces of stuff out of people, it's ridiculous. Nobody cares about that. We routinely will get x-rays or CT scans or something on people and say, oh, well, yeah, look, you got shot 20 years ago and the bullet's still there. It's fine.
Whoa.
It's fine. It sits there. It doesn't move. Once it's there, you don't worry about it. When you're doing surgery on someone, if you're like running up against a bullet fragment or some piece of shrapnel from something, yeah, you can go ahead and take it out. But you don't go looking for it because by itself, it's not going to do anything. It's just going to sit there in your body. It's fine. There are people who get, metal implants put into their body all the time, and they sit there for the rest of your life. And so if someone puts a metal implant into you by shooting you, well, it's fine. It stays there forever. It's okay. There's no reason to go after stuff that's lodged in your body. Rarely does that stuff cause a problem. Just let it be. Thankfully, in this movie, they don't do much of that. But the idea of calling this a shrapnel extractor is absurd. But you probably picked up on that earlier. That's why you mentioned that it sure looks like something you'd use on a bottle of wine.
I would have loved to see that in action in this movie. But it looks like, for all intents and purposes, that the bullet just grazed his leg, just skimmed along the edge there.
Or maybe through and through.
It's not like a big chunk of his flesh is missing necessarily. It looks more like a big gash caused by one of the thousands of bullets that they fired into the jungle. But I really do like this scene when you kind of step away from it and look at it for what it is, where it's the antagonist in a horror movie having a little quiet moment to himself to heal himself. I mean, you never see a Jason or a Freddy just like stitching themselves up because they're like these godly monsters with superpowers who are nigh invulnerable. So this is reminding us that this thing hunting them is really just as vulnerable as they are. If they land a few more.
Really, do you have some way of
shots,
summing that up,
down.
maybe for us?
Do I have a way of summing that up?
The idea that maybe since we're seeing this thing bleeding, that obviously it has some mortality associated with it.
When the big man was killed, you must have wanted it. Its blood was on the leaves.
If it bleeds, we can kill it.
I think the governor said it best.
Wait, which
when
one?
He
Which
said,
governor?
Oh, sorry. And I'm not talking about just the people who just ran for governor, but the people who actually won governorship, like in California specifically.
I see. The governator.
The governor of California. Yeah, he at one point, I think in his life, outside this movie, probably said something along the lines of, if it bleeds, we can kill it.
I see.
If it bleeds, we can kill it.
Yeah, I think that might have been part of his campaign speech.
I don't know how that would really
it was
play
just a mashup of
his
his best lines, and
people voted. Go vote.
And it carried the day. He won.
So I think we're working backwards a little bit here. So in this part, also, like I said before, this is the first time we're seeing the Predator in the flesh, not cloaked. He is now decloaked. So this is the first time for potential moviegoers to be seeing this creature, to be seeing the thing that's hunting them, to be telling people right away, this is not human. There's a little bit of peek into that when the Predator picks up the scorpion and looks at it in his hand, and he has those big claws. But this is our first real look. We see like the claws, we see the flesh, we see some kind of hair-like, spike-like protrusions on the leg. We see how hard this must be for the Predator to do any kind of fine surgery with all these tools. Why didn't they make these tools a little bit bigger?
And the huge, ungainly hands and the stuff all over his wrists. Yeah. No, you can see when he grabs and is crushing this stuff in his hands, is grabbing stuff he lacks a little bit of fine dexterity for sure. Or maybe he's just worried about stabbing himself with those claws on accident.
Yeah, if you look close when he is first...
Yeah, you can see the claws are a little bit floppy.
Yeah, the claws are a little bit floppy, a little bit foam rubbery.
Well, I do like the choice, and I think we've mentioned this before, to slowly reveal the monster in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
That's not always a good choice, but in this movie, I think it's a really good choice. I've heard you and several other people comment on the Godzilla movies about the fact that there's 5 or 6 minutes of Godzilla in a 2-hour movie.
Yeah.
And you're like, what in the world? Anyway, that's an example of a movie where you don't want to bury the reveal quite as much. But in this movie, where you're sort of building the horror elements, I think that it works really well. And and especially in this, where the whole idea of the monster is it's invisible and otherworldly. It works to sort of bring it in slowly, so they don't give us the full shot yet. Is what I'm getting at,
right? And
so they're just revealing part by part.
And even the full shot, which happens next minute when he applies the clamp, it is very, very brief. And he still has the mask on, and he's sitting up in the tree. It roars, he roars, and they can hear it a long way away. Even then, the reveal is something that you're gonna have to pause, which you can't do in the theaters in 1987. You're still left lacking for what you're saying, like a whole picture of what the Predator looks like. And just to give a little bit of background, we've talked about this pretty much ad nauseum when we talked about the Predator design, but the final creature design comes from Stan Winston. You could do some research on the Stan Winston creature shop that he eventually created to work on movies, specifically to create monsters like this for movies, and I'll give him some more background tomorrow when we see the Predator in whole. But Stan Winston was brought on in the middle of production, of course, as anybody who listens to the podcast knows, that it was troubled by a lot of different things, not just a bad costume design, but also the weather itself and the seasons and the lack of foliage in Puerto Vallarta jungle, and people taking advantage of McTiernan as a green director and trying to bring on more and more production assistants than he needed. So eventually they come to a point in the production where they have to stop everything because the Predator costume finally arrives and it just looks like hot garbage. It's kind of like this insect like lizard-like creature. It's kind of skinny and definitely otherworldly, but not nearly the intimidating thing that John McTiernan and the producers and the actors all thought that should be arriving. And so everything stops, halts. They reach out finally to the master creature maker, Stan Winston, and he goes to Rastafarian warriors for inspiration. That's where the dreadlocks come in. There are some other inspirations. He talks a little bit about Zulu tribes being an inspiration, using with the Predator using some primitive weapons, kind of like the stabby, the claws, and then later movies like the spear and a net. Stabby, happy stabby. And then, of course, the interview for the behind the scenes for Predator is interviewing Stan Winston, and he talks about where the mandibles come from, and that's when he said he's flying with James Cameron on a flight to Japan. I'm not really sure why they're going to Japan at the time, but James Cameron, director of Terminator 2, Aliens, The Abyss, Avatar, is sitting there looking at the designs that Winston is coming up for this fix on the Predator design, and James Cameron says that he's always wanted to see something with mandibles.
The creature design evolved given the springboard of the Rastafarian warrior that I had seen the drawing of that Joel had on an airplane flying to Japan with Jim Cameron sitting next to me, and while I was on this airplane flight to Japan, I was sketching concepts for The Predator. Jim Cameron looked over to me and says, I always wanted to see something with mandibles. And I went, oh, really? Well, so what?
And so Winston takes some inspiration from James Cameron and The Predator's face, which we see much, much later in the movie. So, any comments on the Predator's creature design?
Oh, well, that's what made the movie. We've talked about this over and over. That's really what made the movie. It obviously would have been a disaster if they had kept up with the original design. So coming up with this, I think, is just infinitely better. They do make a point of talking about the fact that giving it the kind of snake-like mandibles that open to the sides, as opposed to being a solid lower jawbone, sure made things a lot harder for the end scenes. They had to have individual motors for different parts of the face, and different people with remote controls controlling different parts of the face. And God bless them in all their efforts for keeping up with all of that, because it sure looks cool. I'm sure it took a lot of editing and difficult work to make it look cool, but it looks great in this movie.
Yeah.
Although I have in a few occasions seen some reviews of people who didn't like this movie, and in fact I saw a bunch of those reviews when the latest Predator movie came out. A bunch of people speaking ill of the original, and one of the things they commented on was how much they didn't like the look of the Predator underneath the mask. I think is unfair, and I think does not reflect what the most people thought of the movie, certainly when it first came out, which was that, whoa, that thing looks awesome.
Yeah.
And I think it's only 30 years later in retrospect, when they've had sequels that they didn't like, that people start to criticize it. And
I would argue that a good monster design should be somewhat off-putting and something like unpleasant to look at. It's a monster. It's a bad guy. It's like, make him ugly, make him look like, he took a few punches to the face, or he's has a bunch of different little individualized muscles moving within his mouth. Yep. Make him gross, make him nasty. He's the bad guy. I give full credit to them for pausing it for the creature redesign, because I think if you're seeing like the Jean-Claude lizard-like creature as the reveal, I don't think there's nearly as much awe or intimidation factor for the viewers.
That would be a creature design where I talked about burying the lead. That one you would bury till well after the credits. Right. By which I mean, just keep him invisible the entire movie and never reveal him.
Exactly, just invisible the whole time.
Because it looks terrible.
Yeah, because you would not have the idea that this creature took down Arnold and the gang, or all of Arnold's gang except for him. No, if it's looking like this little snaky thing, yeah, you need something basically like a giant of a man.
Yeah, or they could have just let Jean-Claude out of his suit and thought, well, he's pretty cool as is. I'd see that. I'd watch Jean-Claude versus Arnold.
Jean-Claude all lubed up with the blood, the KY nightstick liquid blood.
Sure.
Hey, try to catch me.
Well, were they ever in a movie together? I don't think they were.
I don't think so. Well,
he was the bad guy in the Expendables 2, right?
He was Blain. Let that sink in. And then Arnold shows up for a little bit in that movie.
Oh, so they are both in that movie.
Yeah, Arnold shows up. I don't remember if it's just to give the mission, or if he actually shows up a little bit later. Maybe I'm thinking 3, where he shows up and plays a bigger part.
Yeah, the Expendables, extremely original and innovative content to name their bad guy villain.
Villain.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a big script difference here. This is in the script. This is right about where things start to diverge. Mm-hmm. Divert. I don't know. This is right where things start to change from the script to the movie.
Yes.
In the script, we see the Predator's ship. The Predator is healing himself on the ship, and I'm going to go ahead and just read off what that would be, because it's pretty nifty to hear about what the Predator ship would have looked like in the original vision of this movie. Exterior, Hunter's Camp. Night. Suspended above the ground, a horizontal slash of intense blue light appears, cutting upward into the trees. The light widens as two vertical lines appear, outlining a small doorway, seemingly cut into the foliage. From within the compartment of a platform slides silently forward, its edges lit by a phosphorescent ring of soft blue light. Nestled within the shelf are an array of otherworldly objects, some looking like weapons. The hunter's hand extends, removing a small blue stone followed by a green stone. He presses the two stones together. With a pulse of energy, they flare, fusing. Holding the pulsing mass in one hand, he places the edge against the faintly glowing wound on his shoulder, cauterizing it. So there's another difference right there. He's wounded in the shoulder in the script. He's wounded in the leg in the movie. The hunter's eyes glow with increased intensity as he winces and screams in pain, an unearthly trilling cry piercing into the night. So it looks like he cauterizes the wound in the script, so it's keeping up much more sci-fi in the script, and you're seeing the ship versus in the movie it's still pretty primitive. It's still kind of maybe what you do in the field if you're wounded in the military. You're busting out these metal tools and some real quick anesthetic or some antiseptic and then some anesthetic. So what kind of difference do you think that is in the movie if all of a sudden it cuts to his spaceship and that's where he's healing himself?
Yeah, that would be a very different movie if they included the spaceship in it. I know in the director's commentary, he talked about the fact that he didn't want to complicate the movie, and he also associated the ship with the end of the movie, which he points out was a much gory end. And so I think that sort of put him off the idea of a ship altogether. Obviously, that would have made the movie a lot more expensive also, and to have this whole nother set and everything that already in an extended, like, long, drawn-out, expensive movie, that's probably not a great plan. The one thing I do like is that, in Predator 2, obviously, they took all of the elements that you were just describing, and they seem to incorporate that pretty faithfully into the ship that you see at the end of Predator 2. It seems like actually that the end of Predator 2 seems very similar to what was written in the script for the end for Predator 1, and I think I'm sure that was on purpose. To try to do that, because probably by the time Predator 2 came around, they had a bigger budget, and they felt like they probably had a few more years of special effects knowledge behind them, could come up with something a little more ambitious than they did for the first movie. I personally am glad that they didn't do the ship. I like the fact that they keep it in the jungle for one, and I also like the fact that that they sort of keep the Predator's origins more mysterious, and I think that helps for a couple of reasons. One is that means if they did want to make a sequel, and obviously they did, I think it gives them a little more freedom for what to do with it. And then the second is that if they didn't want to make a sequel, then great. Then you're not left thinking like about this loose end that never got tied up of all this weird stuff in the spaceship. Which is something that definitely happened at the end of Predator 2 when they showed all the stuff inside the ship. I think that, especially since it came at the end of the movie, I think it set up a lot of expectations, especially when there's a scene and there's a shot in Predator 2 where they have the xenomorph skull in it. And I think that set up a lot of expectations for what should happen with the Predator franchise going forward. And I think, quite frankly, that was to its detriment. I think it would have been better if they let things be more open-ended.
Okay.
And then the other obvious thing is I think in 1987, the special effects just weren't good enough to make a spaceship scene. I don't think it would fit with kind of the realism of the rest of the movie.
Hey, yeah, I agree. I think if you're going there, you're going really sci-fi. I think you're like really committing to it being sci-fi, and you're probably seeing more sci-fi elements throughout this movie so that the producers aren't feeling like they're having to backload everything, that they want to keep the audience interested and on the same sci-fi plane throughout the whole thing. The movie I kind of think of when I think of like you saying that the effects aren't ready is this 80s sci-fi horror movie, Invaders from Mars. Do you remember that one? It was like Tobe Hooper directed it. It's a remake of like a 50s sci-fi horror movie, and it's like the people are dragged into the sand and there's a spaceship under the sand. No, it doesn't ring a bell.
Yes, I do remember this movie.
And they put the alien in the back of the neck. Yeah, I do too. It's one that like kind of pops up in my head every once in a while. But going back and watching that movie, as scary as it was as a kid, it's like terribly, terribly campy with how bad the effects are. So that's kind of what I'm picturing with like a possible Predator spaceship appearance. just how you can really, really lose the audience with bad effects.
Yeah. Yeah, no, just Googling this. Yeah, just Googling this, I'm remembering this movie now. In fact, here's a funny story. So I think that you watched this movie with our parents, or at least our dad. This would have been back in the late 80s, early 90s at some point.
Definitely watched this movie growing. It was one of those like scarring
well, so that's
movies
funny you say that, because I was not invited to this movie. To watch this movie with you guys. I was still a little too young, evidently. And so I'm guessing this was probably 88 or 89 when you guys watched it, because it was at home. And so I was sent off to bed, and at that house that we lived in at the time was big enough where I could actually walk all the way downstairs and sit in the next room behind where you guys were watching TV and just watch from over your shoulder, where it was dark and no one knew I was there. And so I actually watched most of this movie over your guys' shoulders, and then I remember there being a scene in it that really freaked me out, and I was like, you know what, I think I'm just going to go to bed. And I think I'm trying to remember exactly which scene it was that bothered me so much. But it was definitely one, that scared the poop out of me as a kid. I think the thing that scared me more than like the effects or the violence in the movie was the tone of so many of the actors in it. There were so many actors that had such like convincing, awful anguish and horror and dread that that's what really actually scared me as a kid.
Yeah, I didn't know you were watching from the other room. I definitely did that with Mom and Dad growing up. I remember watching some scary movies from our room because you could see right from our room. Are you talking about to the TV?
Well, no, this was
the Westhoff house,
from
right?
Sugarwood House, so it must have been 89 or 90 because we didn't move there till 89 or 90. No, what I was thinking of is in the other house that we lived in. There was that room that had the piano in it, and from there you could sit in the dark. And there was actually another room past the room that had the piano in it. And you could sit there in the dark and just watch through the it had glass doors, that particular room, so you could sit there and watch the glass doors, people that were watching movies there. Yeah, if it looked anything like Invaders from Mars, it would be terrible.
Oh, good. Yeah, but at the very end of that movie, there's a longer sequence where the young kid is in an alien spaceship, and it just looks bad. It just looks like trying too hard. And that's probably what would happen with the Predator spaceship if not done right, if done too much, if overdone. John McTiernan in this minute, he's talking about the glow stick blood, saying that just reiterating what you already said about how they use the green glow stick blood, and that's why it's green and not orange. He doesn't really mention in this commentary, at least not yet, how the local tienda, the Mercado, was not in stock with the orange stuff, but it's just interesting how such like a little, I don't know how you'd say it, like just a little factoid in history just contributes to the canon of this whole franchise. Oh, they have green blood. It was shown in the movie. Well, they had green blood because that's all we could find locally.
Yep.
If they had the orange stuff, it would have been orange blood forever and ever and ever. And yeah, I think it's a good choice. Good choice, everybody. Orange would have been cool too. I wouldn't have minded. Red blood, I think, would have been kind of lame because it's not putting a good enough distance between them and the monster. Red is too much reminding us of like humanity, and that's not what we're meant to think when we see this monster.
Bright neon blood is pretty cool, and they made it look good, which is neat. And I also like the fact that like so many things in this movie and in general movies from the 80s, practical effects almost always look way better than optical or certainly computer effects. And I would say that's, in my opinion, that's still true today. And so the fact that they were able to find a practical way to do this is
keep it all practical. Keep it so you can see it on the screen, like you can touch it, Like you could smell it. What do you think the predator smells like? like ball sweat or like kind of cool water cologne?
Pretty terrible after all this time in the jungle, and he likes it hot, I'm told. So he spends all this time around decaying bodies.
Just bodies.
He's got a little sack full of human skulls that, I just can't imagine he smells nice.
No.
But you know what? Smelling bad is what makes you an elite hunter, right? If you smell the same as your environment.
Exactly. They can't
That's
sniff him
probably
out.
why Billy couldn't smell him.
That's a good point. He just was all slathered up in jungle juices. Anyway, did you have anything else for the minute? I think I am all up to date on my notes.
Hey, did you get a good look at the flask?
Flask! Yeah, we talked about it last minute, how it's a Special Forces logo, missing the arrows and the sword.
Yeah.
I know. Did you ever think that this was the scene where he was like using the scorpion to heal himself? Because for the longest time, I thought he was using the scorpion that he picked up earlier as part of his med kit.
Yeah, no, I think I remember when we were younger. I think maybe you influenced me, but I thought I remembered, that I thought that he was using that. The reason he took the scorpion was to put in his med kit, and that was one of the things he was using here. That doesn't really make any sense, but
no.
In an 8-year-old's mind, maybe that's just perfectly logical.
Did you have something to recommend this week during the weekly recommend segment?
Yeah, I recently was on the internet and found a new site that I like. It's called The Google. Are you familiar with this?
Sorry, it's called The Google?
Yeah, you can find anything on this site. All you have to do is type in what you're interested in, and man, it just brings it right up. Because, just last week I was on Lycos, trying to...
Yeah, the dog.
Trying to find some stuff, and it was just getting so hard. Alta Vista was not giving me any good hits. And then all of a sudden I find this Google website. It really changed my life.
Huh.
Anyway, get rid of Alta Vista, get rid of Google, even Yahoo. Just isn't really cutting it anymore. Google's where it's at.
Google. So is that G-U-G-L-E?
It's it's hard to tell. I thought it was Goggle for a while.
Oh.
But I think it's Google.
I'll have to Google it.
Yes. You might be able to find it by Googling it.
All right. Well, thanks for that solid recommend. I'll make sure to spread the word on that. But my recommend comes from a favorite of yours and mine for many years, Conan O'Brien, the longtime late-night talk show host. He started a podcast called Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. And I've listened to a few episodes. Jeff and I listened to a few episodes when we went down to Portland and back last weekend to go to the Movies by Minutes convention. And Conan O'Brien, just like it sounds, he brings one of his friends on the podcast. And it's always people you've heard of. Andy Richter, Jeff Goldblum, Bill Hader was a favorite of mine, and Tig Notaro, probably my favorite of his episodes. They come on and they just chit-chat. There's no format to the show. It's simply just sitting down and talking a little bit about their history, what's going on with them, and then the podcast ends. I suggest go try it out. Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. And Aaron, this is the part where we're talking about where people can find you. Where can people find you?
They cannot. Quit trying.
Okay. Keep trying, Internet. I don't think you got it in you, though.
No, quit trying.
Quit trying.
Stop it.
Yeah, don't be a tryhard. Stop it!
Stop it!
Find my brother. He'll find me.
So if you're interested in knowing more about the Movies by Minutes community, you can go to the Facebook page, Minute Makers and Listeners, Movies by Minute Master Group on Facebook. And you can ask all sorts of questions about what are the new movies being covered. You can ask about where the big convention is going to happen and what the itinerary is going to be. And if you want to shortcut all that and just see what movies are covered right now, there are currently 137 Movies by Minutes podcasts. You can find that list at moviesbyminutes.com. And the latest one that was added is Forrest Gump Minute. And if you want to contribute to the Predator Minute discussion, you can find us on Facebook as well at Predator Minute Listeners Palapa.
Target's the center of the palapa!
We're on Twitter at Predator Minute, and you can email the show, predatorminute@gmail.com. For Predator Minute, I've been John Zabriskie.
And this is A.A. Ron Zabriskie.
And until next time,
get to the chopper!
Get to the chopper!
All right, goodbye, bro. Boop.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe if you shoot it from a low angle up, it would look bigger, you know? It just was kind of like underwhelming.
The original Predator was not the Predator that you saw. The original Predator was a red figure with one eye in the middle on kind of stilts that on wires and so on.
I just remember standing there and looking across through the trees, and there's this giant red thing coming like this. Like just exactly what we had not been trying not to have, because it was impossible to move and it was terrible. I shot a shot, 2 shots with the damn thing, and just sent it back to the studio saying, "You really don't want us to continue with this, do you?" And they looked at it and said, "Nope, wait, stop."